They say history is written by the victors, but what if the truth was buried with the fallen? Every secret leaves a trace, if you know where to look. This is The Broken Truth, decoding history, one broadcast at a time. The Broken Truth Podcast, where history meets conspiracy. Every case tells a story. Every story hides a lie. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the Broken Truth Podcast. We're going to be starting a new series here that's going to go live every Saturday. Well, not live, but pre-recorded every Saturday at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We're going to dig into a Bible study. I've always wanted to do a deep dive kind of research, both historically, biblically, contextually, to tie everything together. So that series, this is going to be extremely long. Honestly, it's probably going to take years, but grab your wine, depending on what time of day it is, your coffee, your friends, your family, anyone who's a Bible thumping truth seeker, Jesus believer. I think that in this time of concern, this time of worry, this time of unknown, it's important that we stay rooted in a faith over fear concept. So again, grab whatever beverage is your choice, your friends, your family, gather around. This is going to go live once again every Saturday at 3 p.m. Before we get started, though, as you can see, I'm wearing some Broken Truth merch here. This I ended up not liking, so this is all cut out, this background. It's just going to be the mic and the logo. We also have our wine here in our Broken Truth mug. I'm recording this late at night. As you can probably tell, I'm a little rough. But regardless, we're going to hop right into this. I'm really excited for this series, and I hope you guys are going to enjoy this as well. Thank you for our immense growth over the 2 months that we've been recording thus far. I can't even imagine the numbers that we've reached already. So if you do like our podcast and you like all the series that we have to offer, share this with a friend, leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen on, as it really does help the algorithm. Make sure to engage in our content as well. Wherever you listen, drop a comment, share it from wherever you listen as well, because any engagement on that platform allows the algorithm for that platform to promote our content to a greater audience. So let's get started with this podcast. In the darkness, there was nothing, no form, no life, only a boundless deep. Ancient peoples whispered tales of gods, warring in primordial chaos. Yet in one sacred story, there's a battle. Only a voice that speaks into the silent void. Let there be light. What if the true story of our origin is hidden in plain sight? A story where one creator brings order from chaos, where each word shapes reality. Join us as we journey back to the very beginning, to Genesis 1, where the foundation of everything was laid. This is not just a story. It's the key to understanding who we are, why we're here, and the cosmic conflict between truth and deception. Hello and welcome back to the Broken Truth Podcast. I'm your host, Garrett, and today we're diving into Genesis chapter 1. The very first words of the Bible, the story of creation in the beginning. In this long-form Bible study episode, we'll journey through Genesis 1 in depth, exploring its historical context, supernatural worldview, detailed verse-by-verse meaning, and rich theological themes. We'll compare the Genesis creation account with ancient pagan creation myths of Mesopotamia and Egypt, uncovering how the Bible's story stands unique against its cultural backdrop. We'll also unpack major themes like the image of God, the ordering of cosmic chaos, the power of divine speech, and the meaning of the Sabbath rest on the seventh day. But that's not all. We'll examine different interpretive models of Genesis 1, from a literal 6-day creation timeline to literary framework theories and the intriguing functional ontology view. We'll decode symbols and patterns in the text, the repeating rhythms, the significance of numbers like 7, the dualities of heaven and earth, light and darkness, and even a bit of the chiastic literary structure woven into this chapter. We'll explore mythological parallels and reversals, how Genesis 1 might be responding to myths like the Babylonian Enuma Elish or Egyptian cosmologies, turning those stories on their head. And yes, we'll wade into some controversial waters. Creation versus evolution, New Age cosmologies, simulation theory, flat Earth ideas, intelligent design, all the modern debates and conspiratorial theories that swirl around the question of our origin. Finally, we'll bring it down to the personal application. What does this ancient chapter mean for you and me today? How does it speak to our identity and purpose as humans made in God's image? How can the concept of bringing order to chaos apply to the confusion in our own lives? By the end, we hope to spark a cinematic and spiritual awakening in your heart, a fresh sense of wonder at the Creator's power, and a call to reclaim your purpose in His cosmic story. It's going to be an immersive, eye-opening journey, so get comfortable, grab your notepad, or just open your mind and let's dive deep into Genesis 1. First, to set the stage, let's actually hear the text itself. I'll read the full chapter of Genesis 1, verses 1 through 31, so we have the entire creation account fresh in our minds. Feel free to listen, follow along, or just listen to the words that have echoed through millennia that unfold the story of creation. Pardon me looking down as I'm reading from my Kindle. It's a little bit easier for me. So, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light was good. And God separated the heavens from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation plants, yielding seed, and fruit trees, bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation plants, yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from night, and let them be for signs and for reasons, and for days and years, and let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens." So God created great sea creatures, and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning the fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds." And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps, and the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And then God said, "Let us make man in our image and our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food, and it was so. And God saw everything that he has made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning on the sixth day. Continues in Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, describing the seventh day when God rests. But we'll discuss that in a moment. For now, that's the end of Genesis chapter 1. Take a moment to let that history of creation settle in your mind. You've just heard a text written over 3,000 years ago in Hebrew, yet it remains astonishingly profound today. Now, let's break it all down, step by step, starting with the world in which this account was first given. To truly appreciate Genesis 1, we need to understand the historical and cultural world of the ancient Near East, often abbreviated as ANE, in which it was written. This means exploring the ancient worldview of the cosmos and how other cultures' creation myths differ and oddly sometimes resemble the biblical account. In Act 1, we set the stage with the historical and supernatural context of Genesis 1, including the cosmology of ancient Israel's neighbors, their pagan creations, epics, and the unique monotheistic perspective. First, let's talk cosmology. Not the makeup store at the mall, but how ancient peoples viewed the structure of the universe. While today we think of Earth as a globe orbiting the sun in vast space, ancient Israelites, like all their neighbors, pictured the cosmos very differently. They imagined a three-tiered universe: heavens above, earth in the middle, waters below. In their view, the Earth was a flat disk of land surrounded by a cosmic ocean. If you dug down deep enough into the Earth, you'd eventually hit water. The deep, mentioned in Genesis chapter 1. This land floated or was supported somehow. Some texts poetically speak of pillars of the earth upholding it. Above the earth was the sky, which they conceived as a solid dome or vault. The Hebrews called it rakia, traditionally translated as the firmament. This dome was like an upside-down bowl covering the earth. The sun, moon, and stars were embedded in or hung from this solid sky dome, moving across it. And above that dome, more waters. Yes, ancient people believed that there were waters above the sky. Hence, when it rained, it was as if windows or floodgates in the sky opened to let water through. Below that flat earth were the waters below, the great deep ocean, under or around the land, often called Tehom in Hebrew, the deep. Somewhere in that subterranean deep or beyond the horizon was also the realm of the dead, Sheol. So think of a layer cake universe: waters under the earth, flat earth for humans and animals, and the heavens above, the sky dome with lights, and beyond that, the dwelling of God or gods. In ancient Hebrew conception of the universe, the cosmos is envisioned as a series of tiers: the flat earth in the center with seas surrounding it, and the great deep beneath, a solid firmament or dome, arches overhead holding back the waters above. The sun, moon, and stars are set in this dome. Above the firmament is the highest heaven, the domain of God and heavens and heavenly beings. Beneath the earth lies the realm of the dead, Sheol. Such a worldview is reflected in Genesis 1's language of waters above and waters below, the creation of a firmament. Understanding this ANE cosmology helps us read Genesis 1 in context, recognizing that God was communicating with the ancient frame of reference rather than giving a modern science lesson. Why is this important? Well, it's important because Genesis 1 describes God creating light before the sun, or a firmament, separating waters above from waters below. It's speaking in the terms of ancient cosmic geography. As modern readers, we shouldn't get bogged down thinking, wait, there isn't literally a solid dome or waters above the sky. Well, of course, from our current scientific perspective, Earth is a sphere with an atmosphere, outer space, etc. But the Bible's creation account uses the ancient cultural understanding of the world's structure to frame theological truths. God didn't drop anachronistic astrophysics into scripture. Instead, he spoke in a way ancient people would understand. The purpose of Genesis 1 isn't to teach science, it's to reveal who God is and the orderly, purposeful way he made everything. A scholar puts it, God has a flair for drama, but something God does not typically do in the Bible is provide science lessons. He accommodated his message to their worldview. This point will help us later when we talk about interpretive models and science faith questions. For now, keep that three-tiered ancient universe in mind. It will take a lot of Genesis 1 statements clearer. The original audience pictured darkness, water, earth, sky in these concrete ways. When they heard darkness was over the face of the deep and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters, they imagined a dark, endless primordial ocean covering everything, a common idea in many ancient creation myths as well. Speaking of other creation stories, let's compare Genesis 1 with some pagan creation myths from the ancient Near East. Why? Because Genesis didn't arise in a vacuum. The Israelites were surrounded by cultures like the Babylonians, Assyrians, Egyptians, Canaanites, etc., each with their own cosmologies and gods. Understanding those helps us appreciate how revolutionary Genesis 1 is in its portrayal of God in creation. It also reveals where Genesis is pushing back against the prevailing ideas of its time. One of the most famous ANE creation stories is the Babylonian epic called Enuma Elish. In that story, written in Akkadian, dating perhaps to the second millennium BC, creation unfolds through a cosmic conflict. At the beginning of Enuma Elish, nothing exists except primordial waters personified as two gods. Aspu, which is the freshwater, envisioned as a male deity, and Tiamat, which is the saltwater, a female sea goddess, often depicted as a giant dragon or sea serpent. A whole drama ensues. The younger gods rebel against the old. Aspu is killed, and eventually Tiamat rages, raising an army of monsters. The hero god Marduk steps up to battle Tiamat. He slays her, and from her split body, he forms the heavens and the earth. Half becomes the sky, half spreads out as land. Marduk then creates humanity from the blood of Tiamat's ally, Kingu, and the purpose of humans is to do the work the lazy gods don't want to do. Enuma Elish basically serves to exalt Marduk as the chief god of Babylon. It's as much divine politics as it is a creation story. Now, contrast that with Genesis 1. No war, no gore, no multiple gods. Genesis presents one sovereign God who simply speaks the universe into existence. There's no hint of struggle or combat in Genesis 1. God's power is absolute and unchallenged. This is a deliberate and stark difference. Scholars note that while Enuma Elish has a creation from chaos theme with battle, it's actually quite unique in that regard. Genesis, by contrast, has zero violence. Psalm 33:9 later poetically summarizes Genesis 1. For he spoke, and it came to be. He commanded, and it stood firm. In other words, God doesn't need to slay a dragon to form the world. His word alone has irresistible power. Interestingly, Genesis 1 does retain an element of the primordial ocean idea. Darkness was over the face of the deep, and God's Spirit hovering over the waters in verse 2. The Hebrew word for the deep, tehom, is linguistically similar to Tiamat, the name of the Babylonian sea goddess. However, Genesis strips away any notion that the deep is a god or conscious force. It's just water, impersonal, inert, completely under the control of one true God. In fact, even the dreaded sea monster or other myths is demoted to a mere creature in Genesis. In verse 21, God created the great sea creatures, Hebrew, Tananim, sometimes translated sea monsters or dragons. This subtly pokes at other legends. Those terrifying chaos serpents like Tiamat or Leviathan are just parts of God's creation, not rivals to him. There's no dualistic struggle of Yahweh versus the sea dragon. God is sovereign over all. Imagine how this resonated with the Israelites who were familiar with the concept of sea monsters. Genesis saying, yeah, those big sea serpents, God made them, and he called them good. Now consider the Egyptian perspective. Ancient Egypt had multiple creation myths. Egyptian theology was not monolithic. Different cities had different patron creator gods. One prominent account comes from the city of Memphis and centers as a god, Ptah. Uniquely, Ptah says he created the world by speaking and thinking, essentially by his word. An inscription known as Memphite theology says all the divine order really came into being through what the heart of Ptah thought and the tongue commanded. That's striking because it's quite close to the idea of a God speaking creation into existence, like, let there be light. Genesis 1 likewise has God create by divine speech. However, even here there are differences. In the Egyptian story, Ptah is creating other gods by speaking, and Ptah himself had emerged from the primeval waters. In Genesis, God isn't dependent on any pre existing substance. He creates ex nihilo from nothing. Through Genesis 1, verse 1, is terse about it. And critically, there are no other gods to bring into being. Genesis's God is not part of a pantheon. He's outside of and above creation entirely. In other Egyptian myths, like those from Heliopolis, creation involves gods being born, or the sun god Ra emerging from a chaos ocean. These often start with an undifferentiated watery chaos too, but they evolve multiple deities and sometimes bodily fluids, like the god Atum producing children by sneezing or spitting, quite a different vibe than "and God said, and it was so." The Canaanite myth cycle, which Israel would also have known, included a tale of Baal, the storm god, versus Yam, the sea god, a battle where Baal defeats the sea river god and later battles Mot, the death god. Again, divine combat to secure cosmic order. Genesis 1 pointedly has no combat. The sea, Yam in Hebrew, and the great sea creatures are created and ruled by God without a fight. Genesis is basically saying God is infinite in power, the only true God, and everything else sun, moon, stars, sea, skies, monsters, humans are his handiwork, not gods themselves. Also notice Genesis 1's careful avoidance of actually naming the sun and moon. On day 4, it says God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser to rule the night. Why not just say sun and moon? Well, this is probably because in Hebrew and all surrounding languages, the names Shemesh, which is sun, and Yariach, which is the moon, were also the names and titles of deities. By calling them just lights, Genesis also demytholizes them. They're not gods at all. They're just light bearers, created by God to serve his purpose, to mark seasons, days, and years. In the ancient world, practically everywhere else worshiped the sun and moon as powerful gods, but Genesis portrays them as impersonal objects doing the bidding of the creator. This is a bold polemic, logical critique against pagan religion. Similarly, the stars which many cultures revered or thought controlled fate are given a mere half verse. He made the stars also. Almost a throwaway line, as if to say, oh yeah, and all the billions of stars God made too. It's no big deal. This would immunize the Israel against the allure of astrology or star worship. So, in summary, Genesis 1, in its historical context, is like a theological surrounded by polytheistic, conflict driven creation epics. The Hebrew account stands out for its sublime, violence free monotheism. There's one God, sovereign and good, who creates by mere word of power, imposing order on a passive, inert chaos of water and darkness. The sun isn't a god. The sea isn't a god. The monsters aren't gods. Only Yahweh is God. As one scholar observed after comparing Genesis with ancient myths, nothing in Genesis 1 is entirely without antecedent in other ancient Near Eastern literature. and yet its precise depiction and configuration retains its distinctiveness. In other words, Genesis uses cultural canvas of the time, like the concept of a primeval ocean or even the idea of divine rest, more on that soon, but reconfigures everything to reveal a radically different worldview centered on the one true creator. Before we move on, there's another aspect of the context to address: the supernatural worldview of the Bible. Genesis 1 introduces God as the sole creator, but intriguingly, in verse 26, God says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Who is this us here? This has puzzled readers for ages. In the context of the ancient Israelite supernatural worldview, faithful readers in Old Testament times likely understood us as God addressing his heavenly court, what some scholars call the divine council. The divine council refers to God's entourage of angelic or spiritual beings. Later in the Bible, they're called angels, sons of God, who actually serve him. It might sound strange if you haven't heard it before, but there are multiple hints in Scripture of such a heavenly host participating in God's rule. For example, in Job chapter 38, verse 7, it says that when God laid the foundations of the earth, all the sons of God shouted for joy, implying these heavenly beings were present, rejoicing at creation's dawn. So when God says, "Let us make humankind in our image," the best contextual understanding is that he is speaking to this council of angelic beings, essentially announcing his intention in their presence. Dr. Michael Heiser, a biblical scholar specialized in the divine council concept, explains it like this: it's like God is in a room of his angelic staff and says, "Hey, let's do this." Not because he needs their help, but as an announcement to include them in the discussion. They don't actually perform the creation of humans. Verse 27 immediately clarifies that God created humanity. Notice the switch to singular verbs. So God created man in his own image. God alone carries it out. The us reflects a heavenly conversation, not multiple creator gods. In fact, Genesis 1, verse 27's grammar is explicit that only God does the making. All the verbs created are singular in Hebrew. Why would God bother speaking to his heavenly court about making humans? Perhaps to honor them as witnesses to this crowning act of creation, or to hint that humans will in some way be linked to both earthly and heavenly realms. Some have proposed us as God speaking to himself in a plural of majesty or as a hint of the Trinity. However, the ancient readers likely wouldn't have conceived the Trinity yet. That understanding came with the New Testament revelation. Scholars like Heiser note that in Hebrew grammar, there's no real royal we usage like in English. And the early Jewish interpreters more commonly saw it as God addressing angels. We later learn in Scripture that angels are not made in God's image, only humans are. So God alone is the actual creator. The angels watch and rejoice. It's a bit like a CEO saying to his board, "Let's launch a new initiative," and then he himself executes it. The others are onlookers to the decision. This divine council worldview is part of the broader supernatural context of the Bible. Genesis 1 is subtle about it, just the tiny plural pronoun us. But elsewhere, Job, Psalms, prophets, we see God surrounded by heavenly hosts, far from being a weird outlier. And Genesis 1:26 fits that context. It's pretty cool, actually. It implies that from the beginning, God's family of heavenly beings was there celebrating his work. And now, he was about to create an earthly family, humankind, to represent him in the physical world. There's a hint of heaven and earth coming together. We'll talk more about the meaning of image of God in Act 3, but understanding here that in the ancient Near East, the idea of a divine council or a pantheon was common, but those councils were squabbling gods. In Israel's faith, the council is not gods, but created spiritual beings under the one sovereign Yahweh. Genesis 1 casually alludes to this supernatural realm with us, though it doesn't explain it in detail. Later Jewish tradition and some Second Temple literature, like the book of First Enoch, Dead Sea Scroll texts, would expand on hierarchies of angels, the divine council, and even speculate role of various angels in creation. For example, some of the Dead Sea Scroll writings and apocryphal books imagine angels are personified wisdom, assisting God, but Genesis itself stays extremely streamlined. God speaks creation happen. Any heavenly assistants are merely silent spectators here. Fascinating to think that unseen spiritual beings were present at creation's birth. It reminds us that the Bible has a supernatural worldview from page 1. This visible world isn't all there is. An invisible reality exists too. Genesis 1 asserts God created the entirety of reality. The phrase heavens and the earth in verse 1 is a merism, meaning everything. That includes the spiritual heavens and beings therein. In fact, Genesis 2, verse 1, which concludes the seventh day account, says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them." Host can mean the starry host, stars, or the angelic host, like a deliberate double meaning. God finished making everything in heaven's host, angelic armies, and earth's host, earthly creatures. He's the ultimate creator of all realms. So, wrapping up Act 1, we've painted the background. Genesis 1 comes to us from an ancient world of sea monsters, of myths about feuding gods and cosmic battles. In that context, Genesis reveals a radically different truth. There is one almighty God who, without effort, shaped a good and orderly world. He wasn't combating chaos. He was organizing the raw materials, which he created in the first place, by his word. And unlike the capricious pagan gods, this God imbues creation with purpose and value, culminating in humans made in his image. Genesis 1 is simultaneously an ancient text, using ancient ways of describing the world, and a countercultural manifesto about the nature of God and reality. With that context in mind, let's proceed to the text itself, verse by verse, and unpack what's happening each of the 6th-day creation and the 7th day at rest. Keep the background in view, as it will inform the interpretation greatly. Act 2, verse by verse, the breakdown of Genesis 1. So now we roll up our sleeves and walk through Genesis 1 day by day, verse by verse. This section is the heart of the Bible study. We'll examine the language and the meaning of the text itself. I'll draw out key observations and insights on each verse or section, integrating comments from scholars like John Walton, Tim Mackey, Michael Heiser, and more, as well as traditional interpretations. We want to see really what the text is saying and savor the richness and its details. Alrighty, well, I tried to take this all in one take last night, but I just couldn't hang on any longer. So today's a new day. It's currently like 40 something degrees in Vegas, and I'm a desert rat, so I'm absolutely freezing. But let's get right back into this. So we're going to be breaking down verse by verse all of the intricate details of this. So we'll get started where we left off. So Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This famous opening line is like the grand title of the story. In Hebrew, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Right away, we meet the main character, God, which is Elohim in Hebrew. We also get a summary of what he did. He created the Hebrew verb bara. In the Bible, bara is a verb that only God has as its subject. Only God creates in this sense. This implies a unique kind of creative act. Heavens and earth is a phrase meaning everything, the entire universe. So verse 1 can be understood as a declarative summary. At the beginning of time, God made everything, the entire cosmos. This counters any notion that matter or the universe always existed or that some other God did anything. It's all God's work from the start. There's a bit of debate among scholars whether verse 1 is a standalone sentence, in the beginning God created, or if it functions as a temporal clause. When God began to create the heavens and earth, the earth was formless and void. Without getting too technical, the grammar could be read either way, but traditional and most modern take it as an independent statement of fact, which fits pretty well. Either way, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 announces that God is the ultimate source of all that exists. Also, note that it does not specify how long ago the beginning was, nor does it detail exactly how God's initial act of creation relates to the 6 days that follow. Some have read into the idea of creation ex nihilo, creating out of nothing. While that concept is theologically affirmed later in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 3, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 by itself is brief. It basically says God made the cosmos, period. Then verse 2 zooms in on the initial state of things at the start of the creative process. In the context of surrounding cultures, Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 is quietly subversive. Other myths often start with primeval matter or water already there, and the gods come out of them. Genesis starts with God already there, eternal, and Him bringing everything else into existence. It doesn't give detail on God's own origin. He has none. He's just there, the eternal I am. It doesn't name a bunch of gods or give any genealogy of gods. One God making all things, and that's it. This was and is a profound theological claim. Some fun literary notes in the original Hebrew Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 consist of 7 words. Already the number 7, symbolizing completeness, subtly appears. As we'll see, 7 is woven throughout the chapter's structure, a deliberate design. For example, the first verse is 7 words. The second verse is 14 words in Hebrew. The word God appears 35 times in the chapter, which is 7 times 5. The word earth appears 21 times, which is 7 times 3. And it was so appears 7 times. And God saw that it was good, also appears 7 times. The whole passage is saturated with 7s to underline the idea of wholeness and perfection. But we'll dig into the numerical symbolism later in Act 5. For now, let's keep moving. Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. The earth was without form and void, and the darkness was over the face of the deep. And God was hovering over the face of the waters. Here, the narrative sets the stage before God's creative commands. This verse describes the condition of things before the first day's main event, the creation of light. Let's break it down. The earth was without form and void. A famous phrase in Hebrew, tohu vabohu. It's hard to translate, but essentially it means the earth or the land was formless, empty, chaotic, and undeveloped. Think of an uninhabitable wasteland or a blank canvas. There was no order, no life. One translation says formless and empty. Another says a formless wasteland. Importantly, this doesn't mean the Earth as a planet with shape but nothing on it. It's describing the state of creation as an undefined, unstructured mass. John Walton emphasizes that in the ancient mindset, something unformed and void means it lacks function and not that it's literally non-existent. In other words, the material might be there, water and darkness, but nothing has been given purpose or shape yet. The stage is set for God to form these in days 1 through 3 and fill in days 4 through 6. This emptiness, as many commentators have observed, darkness was over the face of the deep, so it's pitch black, and the deep to home refers to the primordial ocean covering everything. Picture an endless dark ocean, no light from sun or stars yet. They haven't been created. In ancient thought, this deep is a symbol of chaos, not evil, but the untamed, undifferentiated state of pre-world creation. There's a resonance with other A&E myths where creation begins with a watery chaos, but as noted, Genesis doesn't depict any monsters active in it. It's just a dark abyss of water, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Here we see God's presence in the chaos. The Spirit of God, Hebrew, Ruach Elohim, can also be translated wind of God or mighty wind. Since Ruach means breath, spirit, and wind, some translations choose a wind from God was sweeping over the waters. But the traditional understanding is that this is God's own spirit, an active personal force, poised over the waters like a bird over her nest. The word for hovering is used in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 11, of an eagle hovering over its young, which gives a nurturing, protective vibe. It's a beautiful image. Even in this dark, undefined abyss, God's spirit is present, vibrating or brooding over the waters, ready to bring forth life and order. It shows that God is about to act. The chaos is under his watch. At this point in the story, no creation in the sense of forming things into their present state has happened, except whatever it is has happened, except whatever is implied by verse 1. We essentially have raw material, watery darkness, and God's enlivening presence stirring. Some have speculated whether verse 2 describes the result of an earlier judgment, like the gap theory, which posits a gap between verse 1 and 2, a whole previous creation, destroyed, leaving chaos. But there's no textual evidence here of that. Verse 2 reads as the natural starting point before God speaks the first word. Many scholars today see no gap. Verse 2 is just the beginning state after God's initial act of creating the basic elements. The formless void is precisely what God is going to transform. Formless and empty, in verse 2, sets up the problems God will solve in the 6 days. He'll form what is formless, days 1 through 3, giving structure to the light, dark, sky, sea, land, and vegetation, and fill what is empty. 4 through 6, filling those realms with lights, birds, fish, animals, and humans. This elegant symmetry shows the purposeful artistry of the account. So the prelude is darkness, water, chaos, but God's spirit there is ready to create. The curtain is about to rise on day 1, a classic depiction of the moment light pierces the darkness, the creation of light, 1886 by Gustave Doré. In this dramatic engraving, the creator's form is shown commanding light into existence, dividing light from darkness. The image captures the theological truth that Genesis 1 conveys without anthropomorphism. God's word alone calls forth light. In Genesis, God's presence, his spirit, was hovering over the dark waters, and at his spoken command, light burst forth, illuminating the primeval darkness. There was no sun yet. This light is portrayed as the initial triumph of order and goodness over undifferentiated darkness. Doré's artwork, though imaginative, helps us envision the profound simplicity of day 1. God speaks and light exists. Genesis chapter 1, verses 3 through 5, day 1, the creation of light and separation of light and dark. So now we're coming to the first day of creation. Verse 3, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. This is the first of God's creative flats. Flat meaning a decree of command. Notice the format, and God said, and there was. This pattern will repeat throughout the chapter. It highlights the efficacy of God's word. He speaks and reality obeys. No other force or being meditates it. The word itself carries creative power. This is foundational to biblical theology. God's word is not just communication. It's an active force that accomplishes his will. As Isaiah chapter 55 verse 11 later says, his word does not return void. So what is this light? This has intrigued people because the sun, moon, and stars are created on day 4. So what's the light on day 1? Some possibilities are that it could be a temporary or primordial light source God made, often imagined as a diffuse glow or a manifestation of his own glory. Some Jewish commentators thought of it as the first light of creation that was later set into luminaries on day 4. The text doesn't explain, but it shows that light as a phenomenon. The reality of day versus night was established before the specific light bearers. John Walton offers an insightful observation. When God creates light here, he immediately defines it by naming it day and separating it from darkness called night. So Walton argues that the focus is not material light particles, but the period of light. For example, time, the cycle of day and night, establishing time itself. In Walton's view, ancient people would think of day as a period, not abstract photons. So God is essentially creating the function of time, day and night cycle on day 1. That's a fascinating way to reconcile the issue. On day 1, God sets up the rhythm of time, day and night. And on day 4, he installs the specific lights to govern and mark that rhythm. In any case, the creation of light first is theologically significant. Light dispels darkness symbolically. Order and goodness entering where there was chaos and obscurity. The New Testament will later pick up on this verse as a metaphor. God who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," made his light shine in our hearts. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 6. Also in John 1, Jesus, the Word, is described as the light shining in darkness at the beginning. So day 1 has layers of meaning later. But in context, it's the literal first step of ordering the cosmos. Verse 4 And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. Here we get to the first evaluation by God. He sees the light and declares it good. This word, tov, in Hebrew means pleasant, fitting, and beneficial. It doesn't necessarily mean moral good, since light isn't moral, but that is exactly as God intended. It has value in the created order. Throughout Genesis 1, God will repeatedly see that things are good, a total of 7 times by the end. It emphasizes that creation is fundamentally good in God's design. There's no hint of evil or flaw in what he's making. Considering how some philosophies, ancient and modern, see the material world or darkness as inherently evil, Genesis affirms the goodness of the creation. Even darkness itself is not labeled bad. It's just part of the ordering of time. It will later become a metaphor for ignorance or evil in some contexts, but as a physical reality, it's part of God's world too. God separates light from darkness. Separation is a key motif in the creation process. God will separate waters above and below on day 2, and separate the land from water on day 3. Separating in Hebrew thought is about making distinctions, boundaries. Here he establishes that light and dark are not a mingled confusion. They have their prior alternating order. God is basically forming daytime and nighttime cycles, a structure to time. Verse 5, God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning on the first day. Now God names the periods. Light is day, capital D meaning daytime, darkness is night. Naming in the Bible often implies authority or defining the essence of something. By naming, God asserts lordship over these elements. Also, giving something a name is very ordering activity. It's classification. In many A&E texts, to name something is to bring it into the realm of known, ordered existence. Walton points out that the fact that God names day rather than the substance light is one clue that what's being created is the function of a day period. Either way, God is defining the cycles of time. Then we have the refrain, and there was evening and there was morning on the first day. This closes out day 1. This phrasing is curious. Why evening and then morning? The likely reason is that in the ancient Hebrew reckoning, still observed in Jewish tradition today, day begins at sunset. So evening, start of dark period, to morning, end of the dark period, constitutes the cycle of one full day-night. Alternatively, it could just be a poetic way to say the day ended at sunset and morning came. The next day began, concluding that one day has passed. In any case, it's establishing the idea of one day. Now, is this a literal 24-hour day or something else? The text uses the normal word yom in Hebrew, which means day, and ordinal numbers, first, second, etc. On the surface, it reads like ordinary days. Many Christians indeed interpret it as literal days, particularly young earth creationists. Others see them as literary days or symbolic days. We'll explore these options more in Act 4 when we discuss interpretive models. At this juncture, just note that the text itself is content to mark the sequence of days without clarifying if these are God's work days or not, corresponding to solar days. Since the sun's not there until day 4, it's part of the framework of the story. So day 1, in summary, God creates light, inaugurates the cycle of day and night. Darkness is not eliminated, but tamed and given its place, night. Light is pronounced good. Time begins. So Genesis chapter 1, verses 6 through 8, day 2, the creation of the firmament, sky, and separation of waters. Day 2 is often a bit perplexing to modern readers. God deals with water again, this time dividing it into 2 layers with a space in between. Verse 6, and God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. The word expanse, Hebrew rakia, is sometimes translated firmament or vault. Based on the ancient cosmology we described, this is the sky dome God is making. Imagine the world as a big sphere of water, like a cosmic ocean, and God carves out a space in the middle by creating a bubble of air. The expanse is that spread out space or dome that holds up the upper waters and keeps a livable space below. So essentially, at God's command, the endless primordial waters are split into two. Some waters go above, held back by the dome, and some stay below, seas on earth. This forms the sky in between. This might sound strange scientifically, but remember, this is describing the world as ancients saw it. The language conveys the God imposed structure on the cosmic waters, creating a habitable atmosphere for life. In ANE thinking, the sky was solid, metallic, or crystalline, and it needed to be solid to hold up the waters above. Think of a giant cosmic roof keeping the upper ocean from crashing down, except when God allows the floodgates to open for rain or, in Noah's flood later, releases tons of water from above and below. Interestingly, other cultures had similar concepts of a sky made by a god. In some Mesopotamian myths, the sky was the half of a slain sea dragon, Tiamat's body, as we mentioned. In Egypt, the sky was a goddess, arched over the earth with her body as the firmament, and the sun sailing in a heavenly ocean above her. Genesis doesn't personify the sky. It's just an object God makes by command. Verse 7. And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. This repeats and executes the command. God made the expanse. Note the use of made, Hebrew asa, versus created bara. Genesis uses create for big categories, heavens and earth in verse 1, sea creatures and humans later, but also uses make and other verbs for shaping and organizing. There is likely no sharp distinction intended. It's stylistic variety. The key is God formed the sky, space exactly as he said. And it was so. Underscores that God's intention immediately became reality. Another repeated phrase in the chapter, showing the effectiveness of his word. So now we have waters below, which at this point presumably still covers the earth because land hasn't appeared yet. So the lower waters are basically the surface ocean, and waters above, a cosmic reservoir held in the dome. Verse 8. And God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. God names the expanse heaven, Hebrew Shemayim, which can mean heavens or sky. This is a bit interesting because back in verse 1, it said God created the heavens, Shemayim, and the earth. Now we're here. The expanse is being called heavens. It shows that the term heavens can refer to different things, the broad sense of everything above the earth, including space, versus the specific sky. Essentially, God is naming the sky as we see it. Also noteworthy, day 2 is the only creation day where it does not explicitly say God saw that it was good. Every other day gets it was good, except the second day. Why might that be? Various suggestions are perhaps because the work of separating the waters wasn't complete in and itself until day 3, when the lower waters are gathered and land appears. So the goodness declaration waits until that whole system is done. Or possibly this is because in ancient thought, the sea water was still somewhat untamed until day 3. So God doesn't pronounce it good until he bounds the seas with land. Some also note structurally that day 3 gets a double good once land appears, once when plants are made, making up for day 2's omission, keeping the total number of goods at 7. So it could just be a stylistic balance, 2 acts on day 3, each good giving the final count of 7 goods. In any case, by the end of day 2, we have a 2-tiered world, the sky above with the waters above it, and the ocean below covering the earth. There's now vertical order in the cosmos, sky versus sea, with airspace in between. But we still lack the land. What's coming next? Genesis chapter 1, verses 9 through 13, day 3, the creation of dry land and vegetation. Day 3 has 2 distinct acts of creation. First, the emergence of dry land and seas gathered. Second, sprouting of vegetation. These are separated by their own, and God said, and God saw that it was good. Statements indicating 2 phrases on the same day. Let's break them down. In verse 9, and God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. Now God tackles the lower waters, the ocean covering the earth. He commands to one place so that dry land can emerge. Picture a globe of water and then the waters receding, pooling into ocean basins and continental land masses rising above sea level. The phrasing one place doesn't necessarily mean literally one ocean, though you could interpret it like a single ocean surrounding a single landmass, which some creationists like to imagine a primordial single supercontinent, but that's just speculation. The focus is that waters are collected and constrained, allowing ground to show. Ancient readers would have understood this as God setting boundaries for the chaotic sea. In the Bible, the sea often symbolizes unpredictability or danger, yet here God pacifies, defining its limits. In Job chapter 38, verses 8 through 11, he poetically describes God saying to the seas, "Thus far you shall come, and no farther. Here is where your proud waves halt." Genesis chapter 1, verse 9 is essentially that moment in narrative form, and it was so. Again, immediate compliance to creator. Verse 10, God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. God names the two results. The dry ground is named earth, the same word eretz that in verse 1 was part of the heavens and earth. Now earth in the sense of land. And the gathered waters are named seas, yamim in Hebrew. Note its plural seas, which might hint that indeed multiple bodies of water are in view, like seas, lakes, etc., all collectively called seas. Importantly, now we have the full ensemble of domains: heaven, earth, and seas. This corresponds well to how later scripture often speaks of God as maker of heaven and earth and the seas. For example, in Exodus chapter 20, verse 11, humans and animals are going to inhabit the land, fish in the seas, birds in the sky, each realm prepared. God now sees this outcome and declares it good. This is the first good since day one. Since day two didn't have one explicitly, the emergence of stable land is a huge milestone. The world is now habitable. In ancient mythic terms, the chaos waters have been tamed and given their proper place. This is order, a separation of sea and land. It's worth reflecting how radically important land is for life. If Earth remained covered by water, complex life, especially terrestrial life, including humans, as we know, couldn't thrive. So this step is necessary to humanity. The goodness suggests that the environment is now suitable to support the coming living creatures. God isn't done on day 3. Now that land exists, he immediately causes it to produce plant life. In verse 11, and God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which their seed, each according to its kind, on the earth." And it was so. This is interesting because here God doesn't directly create plants ex nihilo. Rather, he commands the land to bring them forth. The earth itself is empowered to generate life, and of course, at God's behest. It says sprout vegetation, implying the land was previously barren, rock mud, and is now carpeted with green. The text specifically mentions types of plants, seed-bearing plants, and fruit trees that have seeds in their fruit. Essentially, these represent two major categories of useful plants for agriculture: grains and herbs, which are seed-yielding, and trees with fruit. It might not be an exhaustive botany lesson, but highlights the kinds of vegetation that directly sustained animal and human life with food. The phrase "each according to its kind" appears here and will appear with animals too. It underscores an order and diversity. Plants were made in distinct groups, kinds, that would reproduce within those kinds via seeds. It subtly implies boundaries. Orange trees come from orange tree seeds, oak from oak, wheat from wheat, maintaining the integrity of each category. This counters any mythological idea of hybrid monster transformation. Genesis emphasizes an orderly propagation of life. As a side note, some have tried to read modern science into according to their kinds, but it's not a technical taxonomy or a statement about fixity of species in a modern sense. It just means each basic category of plant and animal was made to reproduce in a consistent way. It's a pre-scientific way of saying that horses birth horses, apple seeds yield apple trees, etc. An observation of the natural order. So God essentially installs a self-sustaining vegetation system on Earth. Plants can now grow, and they come with seeds to continue future generations of plants. And it was so. confirms that vegetation instantly or rapidly blanketed the land. We might imagine fields and forests appearing at God's word, a dramatic, quick greening of the planet. In verse 12, the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kind, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. This verse restates the fulfillment of the command in detail. Indeed, the land produced exactly those plants, each kind with its seed, etc. Repetition often signifies importance and finality. It emphasizes that the command was abundantly fulfilled. We see earth brought forth, again, as if the soil itself is under God's fertility blessing. God sees this botanical explosion and declares it good as well. So day 3 gets a double good, once after land and seas and once after plants. If you're counting, now we've had the first day good, no explicit second day good, and 2 goods on the third day, making the total so far 3 goods. By the end of day 6, it'll total 7 goods, plus the final very good. The double good here might reflect the completion of the foundational work of forming the environment. At this point, by the end of day 3, the stage is fully set. We have air, sea, land, and plants on the land, which will serve as food. The habitats are ready to be filled with animal life in the next days. The kingdoms and realms are established and furnished next. The king, sun, moon, ruling day and night, birds, fish, filling the sky and sea, animals and humans filling the land, will appear in days 4 through 6, which is a nice symmetry. Verse 13, and there was evening and there was morning the third day. Day 3 wraps up. One interesting thing. Many have noticed a structural pattern. Days 1 through 3 involve realms. Days 4 through 6 involve filling these realms. Day 1, light and day, corresponds to day 4, sun, moon, and stars to fill the sky with light sources. Day 2, the skies and seas are separated, which corresponds to day 5. Birds fill the sky, fish fill the seas. Day 3, land and vegetation, corresponds to day 6, where the land and animals and humans eat the vegetation and live on land. This kind of parallelism reflects deliberate literary design. It's as if the creator arranged the creation account in 2 matching sets of 3 days, all crowned by the 7th day of rest. Such a carefully structured narrative again suggests that Genesis 1 is not a haphazard myth, but a purposeful telling with theological symmetry. It's orderly, just like the creation is described. So by the end of Act 2, day 3, we have a world that is no longer formless and void, at least not formless. It now has form. Day and night cycles, heavens versus earth versus seas and continents with lush vegetation. The void and emptiness part is partially solved by vegetation, but the animal life and human life are still absent. That's what the next acts and days will address, filling those realms with living beings. Genesis chapter 1, verses 14 through 19. Day 4, the creation of sun, moon, and stars. Moving forward into the second half of the week, day 4 corresponds to day 1. On day 1, God created light and separated day and night. Now on day 4, he installs the luminaries, the permanent light fixtures, so to speak, to govern those day and night cycles and 4 signs and reasons. This is a rich segment because it touches on the purpose of celestial bodies and, as mentioned, downplays their divinity. Verse 14, and God said, "Let there be to the heavens to separate the day from night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." Here God commands into being the lights. Hebrew meorot, sources of light, in the sky dome, the expanse of the heavens. For example, the vault of the sky, the primary stated purpose to separate day from night. We've already had day and night separated, but now he's providing consistent physical agents to mark that separation daily. These lights are for signs and seasons and days and years. This indicates multiple roles. The signs in the ancient world, celestial events like eclipses, new moons, etc., were often seen as signals from the gods. The Hebrew word otot, signs, might mean simply markers or indicators, not necessarily astrological omens. The Bible later forbids divination by stars, but signs is in natural signs for times, the navigation or omens of weather. It could also hint at them declaring God's glory. In Psalm chapter 19, verse 1 says, "The heavens declare God's glory. The skies show knowledge." One might say they signify God's power. Seasons. The Hebrew is moedim. which often means appointed times and is used for religious festivals and seasons. So, one key role of sun and moon is to establish a calendar, liturgical and agricultural. Israel's festivals were based on lunar calendars, like Passover at full moon in spring. Here is a little subtlety. The text suggests from the start that these lights will enable humans to track sacred times, appointed feasts, as well as natural seasons. Days and years, the sun with Earth's rotation obviously marks the length of days in its orbit, or Earth's orbit around it, defines the year length. The mention of years is interesting because a year wasn't perhaps as critical to a nomadic or earthly society except for seasons and farming. Is basically saying the whole rhythm of time, daily, monthly, yearly, will be regulated by these lights in the sky. In summary, the luminaries are installed as the cosmic clock and calendar. They will give humanity the means to measure time and to order life accordingly. This perspective is very practical and demystified. Compare that to how other cultures worship as powerful deities controlling fate. Genesis says no, they are functional objects made by God to serve practical purposes for mankind, giving light and marking time. It's quite a down to earth view, all pun intended. Verse 15, and let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon earth, and it was so. Another purpose, to give light on the earth. On day one, there was light generally. Now that light will normally come from these fixed heavenly bodies, and it was so implies that as soon as God commanded the sun, moon, stars took up their appointed places and functions. Verse 16, and God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night and the stars. This verse explicitly mentions the sun and moon, but notice it studiously avoids using the words sun, shemesh, and moon, yarach. Instead, it says greater light and lesser light. As we noted, this likely avoids invoking their names, which were names of gods in many languages. Shemesh was also the name of a sun god in Canaan. By calling them lights, Genesis almost sounds a bit dismissive. They're just lamps. It then uses a significant phrase. These lights will rule the day and the night, respectively. To rule, Hebrew, meshalah. In Hebrew, memshalah is used to related to dominion, means to govern or regulate. The sun governs the daytime, meaning daylight hours exist because of the sun's presence. The moon rules the night, not making it bright as day, but the moon and stars dominate the night, sky, and provide a lesser light. And in the lunar cycle, the moon can give significant light, especially when full. They act as governors of time. It's like God delegated a part of his authority over the cycle of day and night to these created objects. Yet, they only rule because he appointed them. They have no independent divinity. And the stars is almost tacked on. Oh yeah, he made the stars too. Considering how much humans adore and fear the stars and astrology, this brevity is poignant. It implies making the myriad stars was no trouble for God. It's stated almost nonchalantly. In an oral reading of Genesis 1, you could imagine the original listeners maybe chuckling. All these stars people worship, Yahweh just spoke them into being as an afterthought. It shows the immense scope of God's creating power. Not just Earth, but the entire cosmos of stars and his handiwork. Verse 17, and God in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. The picture is like God placing the moon, sun, and stars in the sky dome. From Earth's perspective, they're in the firmament to give light on the earth, and it repeats their functional job. It's very geocentric. Phenomenologically, from our vantage, they are the dome overhead providing light to us. One could scientifically nitpick. Stars are not in the sky dome or firmament. They're far beyond. But the language is describing how it appears and what their role is relative to Earth. The biblical writers weren't concerned with astrophysics, but with teleology, which means purpose. The purpose is Earth-centric. Light exists in heaven for the benefit of Earth's inhabitants. This is a very human-friendly cosmos, unlike, say, some modern nihilistic view where humans are an insignificant accident in a vast, uncaring universe. Genesis shows the universe is deliberately arranged with humankind in mind from the start. Lights for calendar and light. Plants for food. Verse 18, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. This reaffirms the role. Rules the day and night, and they separate light from darkness. Wait, wasn't light separated from darkness on day one? Yes, but that was just conceptually. Now, the continued separation, maintaining that distinction, is daily. It's carried on by the sun and moon cycles. There's a sense of continuity. Initially separated them. Now he delegates that ongoing separation to these created ordinances of heaven, which he upholds providentially. It's subtle, but we see the theme of order again: separation, rule, boundaries. The cosmos is not chaotic, it's governed and structured, and God saw that it was good. So he approves of these celestial bodies and their functions. There is goodness in the lights and presumably in the rhythms of time they create. Life on Earth will depend on the sun's energy, the season cycles for agriculture. So indeed, it is good, both aesthetically and practically. One more observation. Day 4 might have been particularly important for an Israelite's audience polemically, because neighboring cultures worshipped astral deities, sun god, moon god, stars for divination. Genesis 1's way of telling it undermines all that, calling them just lights, assigning them roles under God's command, and labeling them good, as in part of creation, not gods themselves. Later on, the Torah will strongly forbid worshiping the sun, moon, or any of the host of the heavens in Deuteronomy chapter 4:19. And here's the theological foundation for that. They are creatures, not creators. In fact, it's almost as if the real rulers of the day and night are not gods, but these inanimate objects which God's people should certainly not worship. Only the creator behind them is worthy of worship. In verse 19, and there was evening and there was morning on the fourth day. Day 4 concluded. At this point, the heavens, the sky realms, are fully furnished. We have the physical lights the ancient reader might now realize. So that's where the sun and moon I see came from. God put them there on day 4 to serve his purposes. Also think of the literary symmetry. Day 1, God created light and separated day and night, but no sun and moon were mentioned. On day 4, God creates the sun and moon to fill that function. He says to separate day and night. This is one reason some scholars see day 4 as a recapitulation or elaboration of day 1. Some call it temporal recapitulation, describing the same event with more detail later. However, the plain reading looks sequential. Either way, the correspondence is strong. Now, on to the next day. Genesis chapter 1, verses 20 through 23. Day 5, the creation of sea creatures and birds. Day 5 begins with the filling of the realms made on day 2. Day 2 separated the sea and the skies. Day 5 populates those with living creatures, fish and sea creatures in the waters, and birds in the sky. This is the first day where animal life appears. Verse 20, and God said, let the water swarm with the swarms of the living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens. God's command covers 2 domains, water and sky. The imagery is vivid. Swarm with swarms. The Hebrew uses the verb and noun of the same root, sharat, like team with teeming things. It suggests waters full of life and abundance of swimming creatures. Living creatures translate nefesh, chaya, literally living soul or living being. Here it is applied to animals, not just humans. In the Hebrew conception, animals too have nefesh, meaning breath or life, not an immortal soul, but the principle of life. So fish and sea life are considered living beings, not with breath, even if this is gill breath. Then the birds, literally, let the birds fly above the earth on the face of the expanse of the heavens. So birds are flying in the open sky. We might note that bird includes all flying creatures. Bats may be excluded since they're not birds, but generally anything that flies, including insects possibly. The text uses ulf for flying creatures, often rendered birds, so God's intention is to fill the water below and the sky above with animated life. Verse 21, so God created the sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. This is a big verse. Here, interestingly, it uses the verb bara, created, again, the first time since verse 1, and later it will use it for the creation of humanity in verse 27. God created the great sea creatures, Taninim, and all the other aquatic life and all winged birds. The mention of great sea creatures is intriguing. The Hebrew Taninim often refers to large sea beasts, sometimes translated as sea monsters, dragons, serpents, or whales. In ancient Near Eastern mythology, Tanin or Leviathan were chaos monsters associated with the sea. Remember, Tiamat. By specifically mentioning God created the Taninim, Genesis is likely reclaiming as just part of God's world. They are not rivals or chaos incarnate. They are simply big animals in the ocean, made by God and declared good. This includes creatures like whales, giant squids, perhaps now extinct marine reptiles. Anything that would awe people as a great sea beast. To an ancient Israelite, the biggest known sea creature might have been a whale or simply the mythical Leviathan. Genesis says God made Leviathan too. Indeed, Psalm chapter 104, verse 26 celebrates, "There go the ships and Leviathan, which you formed to play in the sea." So even Leviathan is just a playful creature of God in some texts. Then it says, "Every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds." So all fish, sharks, jellyfish, aquatic invertebrates, everything that moves in the water. The phrase "with which the waters swarm" implies the waters are now filled with schools of fish and swarms of sea life. Again, according to their kinds, shows there are categories: fish after fish kind, after their kind, etc. A diversity of species, each reproducing its own. Likewise, every winged bird according to its kind, birds, bats, if included, and flying insects, if included, all were made, each in its category. It's notable that the text doesn't explicitly mention insects or land, invertebrates, anywhere. Possibly they are subsumed under creeping things on day 6, or just not specifically enumerated. But some read charrettes, swarming things, as including insects, though here it's in water context. Anyway, at the end of verse 21, God sees this teeming life in sea and sky and pronounces it good. The marine and avian life are part of the good creation. This is the second time we see bara used. Some theologians point out bara is used for big steps, the cosmos in verse 1, the creatures in verse 21, and mankind in verse 27. Possibly underlying those is special creative act of God's direct innovation. The creation of living conscious creatures might be seen as a new level beyond simply shaping matter, hence bara. Alternatively, it might just be stylistic and parallel to verse 27, anticipating the final creation of humans. Verse 22, "And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." This is the first time the word blessed appeared. God blesses the animals. To bless in Hebrew, barak, which means to confer, favor, or empowerment for success. Here, the content of the blessing is given, the ability and command to be fruitful and multiply, a phrase meaning reproduce abundantly and fill their respective domains. So God essentially empowers these creatures to procreate and spread. This is interesting. Plants were simply made with seed in them, but not explicitly blessed, though the ability to reproduce seed is a sort of natural blessing. Animals, however, as sentient, moving beings, receive a spoken blessing and command. This shows God's positive intention for life to abound. He wants to see thronging with fish, the sky filled with flocks. This is not meant to be sparse. God delights in abundance. This fruitfulness theme is crucial. It will be given to humans too on day 6. Notice also, this implies from the start that creation is not static. God built in procreation and population growth as part of the plan. Creation wasn't made as a fixed number of creatures, never to change. It was made with dynamic processes, birth and growth, to continue expanding the initial population. So in theological terms, God delegates to the creatures a role in ongoing creation through reproduction. They part in filling the earth. It's a gift and purpose given by God, hence a blessing. blessing is spoken to them in a way God blessed them, saying. It suggests animals, in some sense, receive this communication, not rationally like humans, but it's written from an observer's perspective that God pronounced it over them. In verse 23, and there was evening and there was morning the fifth day. Day 5 ends. Now the oceans and the skies are alive. Day 5 doesn't explicitly say God saw it was good at the very end, because it already said it after creating them in verse 21 before the blessing. But presumably, it's all good by the end too. The pattern of each day's evaluation had an exception on day 2, but day 5 got its good in verse 21. At this point, nearly everything is ready except land animals and the pinnacle, humans. So far, we've seen a progression from inanimate to animate. First plants, alive but not conscious, then animals, alive and moving, and next humans with something even more special. This seems to be an ascending order of complexity and significance. So now we're going to move on to Act 3, the theological themes in Genesis 1. But before we proceed, Days 6 and 7, this is a good place to pause our narrative and dig into some major theological themes that Genesis 1 teaches. We've touched on them, but let's highlight 4 big themes explicitly. The image of God, cosmic order, divine speech, and Sabbath. These concepts not only inform the meaning of Genesis 1, but echo throughout the rest of and into our lives today. The image of God, human uniqueness and purpose. In Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, which we'll read in a moment, in Act 2, break down. It declares that human beings are made in the image of God. Selem Elohim in Hebrew. This is one of the most profound theological statements in the Bible. No other ancient Near Eastern text says humans are made in the image of a single supreme God, although some say kings are images of God, of gods. Genesis democratizes it. Every human, male and female, is the image of God. Let's unpack what that means. First, what it doesn't mean. It's not primarily about physical appearance. God is spirit. He doesn't have a body like ours, aside from Jesus and the incarnation much later. Image is more about function and status than literal looks. In the ANE context, Selem of a god was often a statue placed in a temple to represent the deity's presence. Also, kings were sometimes called the image of their god, meaning they represented the god's rule on earth. Genesis uses that concept but applies it to all humanity. So, one aspect of being God's image is being his representative rulers on earth. We are, in effect, God's ambassadors or viceroys, appointed to administer and steward creation under his authority. This is seen in the immediate context, right after saying, "Let us make man in our image." God says, "And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, birds, livestock, and all the earth." So dominion, royal stewardship, is linked to image. Michael Heiser emphasizes that image, in Hebrew, can be thought of as a verb or function. To image God is to act as his representative. He notes that the phrase "in the image of God" could be understood as the image of God, meaning we were created as God's imagers, God's earthly representatives. It's not something we have, like an attribute that can be lost. It's something we are by definition. All humans from consent are image bearers. It's our status. It doesn't come in degrees. You're either human, thus God's image, or not. This has huge implications for human dignity and equality. If every person is the image of God, then every person has inherent worth. The ancient world, and sadly still today, people were often treated as property or of unequal value. Slaves versus free, royals versus commoners. The Bible's first chapter declares the fundamental equality and sanctity of human life, male and female. He created them in his image. There's no gradation. Not only kings, not only men, but women too. All ethnicities, all abilities, all share the image, day. John Walton and others also point out that in ancient culture, an image of a god also could mean sonship or kingship. The phrase image and likeness in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 is echoed when Adam has a son, Seth, in his own image and likeness. Genesis chapter 5, verse 3. That suggests being in God's image implies we are in a childlike relationship to God, his offspring, intended for relationship. So humans are family to God in a way. Other creatures aren't. There's a very loving concept, God as Father, humans as his children, a theme fully developed later in Scripture. So being the image of God carries at least three ideas. One, representation. We represent God's rule and character in creation. Two, being the relationship. We have a unique capacity for communion with God, like children to a parent. Three, being responsibility. We are tasked with stewarding the earth, the dominion mandate. Heiser summarizing the image of God. We are created to image God, to be his imagers. It is what we are by definition. The image is not an ability we have, but a status. We are God's representatives on earth. To be human is to image God. And immediately, verse 28, which we'll discuss later, gives the so-called cultural mandate. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and have dominion. That's the human mission statement right there. We are to carry God's wise and benevolent rule into the world, cultivating it, bringing order. Subdue means to bring under cultivation, not to abuse, and managing other life forms responsibly. Notice, dominion is not exploitation. God's own rule is caring and sustaining. We reflect God best when we rule like servant kings, not tyrants. As image bearers, we should mirror God's character, his creativity, his moral sense, his love for justice and compassion. Also, the relational side. Because we're in God's image, we have the capacity for reason, language, morality, creativity, and spirituality. We can relate to God in worship and obedience in a way animals cannot. That sets us apart. It's why humans build altars, compose music, seek meaning. We are by nature religious beings, oriented to our Creator. This ties to a supernatural theme. Let us make man in our image. As we explained, God is probably addressing the divine council, but Heiser notes the image of God is not shared with angels. Verse 27 clarifies God created humankind in his image, singular. The us wasn't including angels in making us like angels. Rather, God alone made us like himself, and perhaps the us are witnesses. Humans are distinct from and even above angels in terms of bearing God's image and eventually in destiny. Interestingly, 1 Corinthians chapter 3 verse 6 says that we will judge angels and we see God incarnate as a human, not as an angel, indicating how special the human image is to God. Summing up, the image of God is the cornerstone for understanding human identity in the Bible. It tells us who we are, God's offspring and representatives. What we're worth, the infinite value, since we reflect the infinite God. This grounds human rights in a way nothing else can. What we're meant to do, which is rule the earth as God's stewards, multiplying godly civilizations that honors our Creator. How we should treat each other with dignity, love, and justice, since to harm a human is, in a sense, an offense against God's image. Genesis chapter 9, verse 6 cites the image of God as reason not to murder. In a broken world, we often fail to represent God well, but Genesis chapter 1 sets the ideal. And the rest of the biblical story, including the redemption in Christ, can be seen as God restoring his image and humanity to its full glory. Romans chapter 8, verse 29 speaks of being conformed to the image of Christ, the perfect image of God. The cosmic order from chaos to cosmos, a second major theme in cosmic order. In fact, the word cosmos comes from Greek, cosmos, meaning order, opposite of chaos. Genesis chapter 1 is all about God bringing order out of disorder. Recall the initial state, formless and void, darkness, deep waters, essentially chaos, though not in the sense of an evil power, but a disordered, non-functional state. By the end of the chapter, we have an intricately structured cosmos. Light separated from dark, waters divided and bounded, land emerged, vegetation growing, celestial bodies marking time, creatures filling environments, all in a harmonious system. Everything in Genesis chapter 1 speaks order, boundaries, and purpose. God separates, names, and assigns roles, sun to govern day, and so on. There's a clear structure. 6 workdays, each accomplishing a task in a logical progression, culminating in the 7th day of rest, which signifies completion and stability. In contrast to mythologies where creation might come through violent struggle or whimsical acts, Genesis presents creation almost like the erection of a well planned temple or kingdom. There's a sense of deliberation and wisdom in how it's arranged. This is why some scholars, like Walton, propose that Genesis 1 portrays the universe as a kind of cosmic temple prepared for God's presence and worship. The 6 days could be seen as an inauguration week where God is setting everything in order, and day 7 he rests, takes up residence or throne in his cosmic temple. More on Sabbath soon. In ancient Near Eastern thought, gods would rest in the temple after the temple's dedication, meaning they take up rule there. Walton notes divine rest means God is now in control, at the helm of the ordered world, not that he's napping. So, order is primary good in Genesis 1. The repeated, it was good, affirms that each thing is in the right place doing its intended function. It fits the order. The final very good, after making humans and everything, is like saying everything is working together in a very good way. There is shalom, peace and wholeness. It's important to see how Genesis celebrates boundaries in positive, dividing things appropriately. Our culture sometimes hears separation negatively, but here it's about creating meaningful distinctions that make life possible. Night, day, land, sea, and so on. Biblical faith holds that God established boundaries. Physical, moral, even gender distinctions later are part of the good order. Chaos is kept at bay by these divisions. When boundaries are erased, like land and sea, mixing in a flood, or moral chaos and human sin, trouble ensues. Another aspect is that the symmetry in the text reflect order. For example, 7 days, parallel structure of days, and numeric patterns. It's as if the author embedded order with the literature itself as a mirror of the cosmic order, truly a work of art. The idea of the world as a cosmos originates here, a universe ordered by rational good design. This is why science could develop, because Judeo-Christian thought said the world is orderly and governed by laws from a lawgiver, not random chaos or capricious deities. Every time we rely on the consistency of nature, we're implicitly trusting the Creator's order. Also, the goodness of creation flows from its orderliness. In many pagan myths, matter or the physical world was seen at best neutral or at worst evil illusion, like some Greek philosophies. But Genesis 1 pronounces the material world good. There's no hint that spirit equals good matter equals bad. God likes physical reality. He made it good. This counters Gnostic or ascetic ideas that later arose. It means our bodies, the environment, food, work, all earthly stuff are inherently good if used rightly. God is not a God of confusion, but of order. In 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 33, it echoes this context of church worship, a principle drawn from creation's nature. The theme also implies that God brings order to chaos in our lives. It's his character, where he is allowed to rule. He brings light to darkness, form to the formless, meaning to the meaningless. That's an encouraging spiritual application. Our lives can feel tahu vabohu, formless and void, sometimes, but God can speak order and purpose into them. In fact, the New Testament uses creation imagery for salvation. If anyone is in Christ, new creation. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17. And God, who commanded light to shine out of darkness, made his light shine in our hearts. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 6. So conversion is like God saying, let there be light into a dark heart. In sum, the cosmic order theme shows God as wise king establishing a harmonious universe. Everything has a place and function, a beautiful life sustaining system. This application that we, as his image bearers, should value and maintain that order. Be it ecological stewardship, social order based on justice, or personal discipline reflecting God's design. So this Bible study episode for chapter 1 of Genesis went a lot longer than I planned. This is now the third time I'm here recording, and we're an hour and a half into this. So we'll pick up chapter 1, and I'll try to narrow down the deep dive of this Bible study. But I want to leave you guys with a prayer. So please bow your head and join me in prayer. Father, thank you for meeting us in your word tonight. Thank you for the truth you reveal, the clarity you bring, and the light you shine into the places we didn't even know were dark. Lord, as we step away from this study, don't let these words stay on a page. Write them in our hearts, let them shape the way we see you, the way we see the world, and the way we see ourselves. Where this is chaos in our lives, bring order. Where there is confusion, bring wisdom. Where there is fear, bring, and where there is darkness, speak again and say, let there be light. Make us people who carry your image well in our homes, in our decisions, in our relationships, and in every place you've given us influence. Strengthen us to walk in truth, to discern deception, and to stand firm in a world that drifts further from you every day. We give you this week, we give you our hearts, and we ask you to continue revealing yourself as we journey through your word together. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.